General Hospital will reveal the past always has a way of resurfacing, unraveling truths that were meant to stay buried and unleashing consequences no one could have foreseen. For years, Brooke Lynn and Lois had lived under the weight of their guilt, carrying the burden of a horrifying secret, the child they had given away. At the time, they hadn't been strong enough to face reality, hadn't been brave enough to keep the baby, and never could have imagined how their decision would ripple through time, shaping destinies in ways they never intended. But no secret stays hidden forever, and when the truth finally came to light, it shattered the lives of everyone involved. Gio had found a place to belong under Sonny Corinthos' protection. In the Corinthos home, he had security, stability, and for the first time, a family. Yet, what he never expected was the bond he would develop with Rocco. At first, their relationship had been that of close friends, brothers in every way except by blood, or so they thought. Their connection grew deeper, unspoken yet undeniable, an attachment that transcended mere friendship. When they finally recognized the love they held for each other, they had no idea that fate had already set them on a collision course with tragedy. Rocco had fallen in love with Gio. The revelation came like a thunderclap, tearing their world apart. Brooke Lynn stood frozen, her face drained of color, her lips parted in silent horror. Lois trembled, her entire body shaking under the weight of the past crashing back upon her. Sonny, the unshakable man who had endured a lifetime of battles, found himself speechless, unable to reconcile what he had just learned. Gio and Rocco, bound by love, were also bound by something far greater, blood. The truth was merciless. The same love that had once been their safe haven was now a forbidden curse. The emotions that had once been their greatest comfort now became their deepest torment. They weren't just lovers, not just soulmates drawn to one another in ways they couldn't explain. They were brothers. Their love, however deep, could not defy the reality of their bloodline. What had once been a dream, a quiet and beautiful promise, had become an unbearable nightmare. And Brooke Lynn, who had once believed this secret would remain buried forever, could do nothing but watch as the very foundation of their lives collapsed. But was this truly the end? Or was it merely the beginning of a heartbreak far more devastating? When the truth about Joe's identity was finally exposed, Rocco's entire world crumbled around him. It was as if the ground beneath his feet had been ripped away, leaving him suspended in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The person he loved most, the one who had been his constant companion, his confidant, his source of strength, was not who he thought he was. Gio wasn't just his best friend, his first love. Gio was his brother. A sickening wave of nausea rolled through Rocco as the weight of that realization crashed down on him. His stomach twisted painfully, his chest tightened, and suddenly, he couldn't breathe. The very foundation of his existence had been built on a lie. The love he had cherished, nurtured in quiet moments and unspoken glances, had been doomed from the start. It wasn't just forbidden, it was impossible. Rocco felt as if he were being torn apart from the inside. Disgust, despair, and fury surged through him in equal measure, making his hands tremble, his vision blur with unshed tears. How could this have happened? How could no one have told them the truth before it was too late? If fate had been cruel enough to give him Gio, why had it also been cruel enough to take him away in the most twisted, heartbreaking way imaginable? But the betrayal didn't end there. It wasn't just Gio who had unknowingly deceived him, it was Dante. His father. The man he had trusted more than anyone in the world. The man who had always taught him the importance of honesty, of family, of doing the right thing. And yet, Dante had known. He must have known. He had let Rocco walk blindly into this trap, had allowed him to love Gio without ever warning him of the truth. Hot, angry tears burned Rocco's eyes as he clenched his fists, his whole body shaking. He wanted to scream, to hit something, to demand answers that no one could give. He had spent his entire life believing that love was the one thing that could never betray him. But now, it felt like love had been nothing more than a cruel joke, a mirage that had led him straight into the abyss. And the worst part was, despite everything, despite the horror, despite the pain, he still loved Gio. He knew he couldn't, knew he wasn't supposed to, knew that the very thought of it would tear him apart, but his heart refused to let go. Because love wasn't something he could erase, no matter how much he wanted to. And that realization, that was the cruelest cut of all. Here is an even longer and more detailed version of your passage in English, capturing the full depth of Rocco's turmoil, his descent into self-destruction, and Dante's helplessness in trying to save him. Rocco couldn't accept reality. No matter how many times he replayed the truth in his mind, no matter how many times he tried to force himself to see Gio as his brother rather than the person he loved, it never got any easier. The weight of it crushed him, suffocating him, poisoning every happy memory they had shared. He felt like he was drowning, trapped in an endless nightmare where every escape only led him deeper into the darkness. And so, unable to process the grief, unable to contain the agony, he let himself unravel. At first, it was subtle, skipping classes, withdrawing from his family, avoiding eye contact when Dante tried to speak to him. But soon, the pain inside him became too much to hide. Rocco lashed out at anyone who dared to reach for him. He snapped at Olivia, slammed doors in Sonny's face, ignored his friends' worried texts, and scoffed at Dante's desperate attempts to bring him back from the edge. His rage, once silent and buried deep, now exploded at the slightest provocation. He started picking fights, at school, on the streets, even with people twice his size. But fights weren't enough. The pain in his chest was too deep, the anger too consuming. He needed more. He needed to lose himself. Rocco started sneaking out at night, wandering the city aimlessly until he found places where no one knew him, where he could pretend he was someone else, someone who didn't have to live with the truth. He drank until his vision blurred, until the ache inside him dulled, even if only for a few hours. He let strangers drag him into trouble, let reckless impulses take over, let himself teeter on the edge of destruction because, for the first time, it felt like control. Dante saw it happening. He saw his son slipping through his fingers, watched helplessly as the boy he had raised turned into a stranger. He tried everything, reasoning with him, pleading, grounding him, offering help, but nothing worked. Rocco didn't want to be saved. He didn't want to hear that it would get better, because it wouldn't. He didn't want to hear that they could fix this, because they couldn't. The damage was done. Every night, Dante lay awake, waiting for the sound of the front door opening, for the telltale signs that Rocco had made it home safe. Some nights, he didn't. And when he did, he reeked of alcohol, of sweat, of bad decisions, his knuckles bruised, his eyes hollow. "Talk to me," Dante begged one night as Rocco staggered through the front door, his lip split, his shirt torn. "Tell me what I can do." Rocco just laughed, a bitter, empty sound that didn't belong to the boy Dante had once known. "You can't do anything, Dad. None of you can." And he walked away, leaving Dante standing there, his heart breaking. The more Dante tried, the further Rocco pushed him away. It was as if every effort to help only fueled his son's self-destruction. Olivia tried reasoning with him, but he wouldn't listen. Sonny offered to step in, but Dante refused to let anyone else take control. He was Rocco's father. It was his job to save him. But how could he save someone who didn't want to be saved? Days turned into weeks, and Rocco only spiraled deeper. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something Dante didn't recognize, something lost, something broken. And every moment that passed, Dante felt himself losing his son a little more. He had faced criminals, mob wars, and life-or-death situations. But nothing had ever terrified him as much as the thought of losing Rocco to his own pain. And worst of all, Dante feared that no matter what he did, it might already be too late. Gio wasn't doing any better. If anything, he was falling apart just as much as Rocco, only in silence. The pain of watching the person he loved spiral out of control, slipping further and further away, was unbearable. Every time he reached out, Rocco pushed him away. Every time he tried to explain, Rocco refused to listen. And the worst part? Gio understood why. How could he blame him? Rocco had been betrayed in the worst possible way. His entire reality had been ripped apart, and Gio had been at the center of it. Even though he hadn't known, even though he had never meant to hurt Rocco, none of that mattered. The damage had been done. They could never go back to the way things were. Gio wanted to apologize, to do something, anything, to fix this, but there was nothing left to fix. The storm had already hit, and they were both drowning in it. Each day, Gio watched helplessly as Rocco became more reckless, more self-destructive. He saw the anger in his eyes, the way he lashed out at everyone, the way he refused to let anyone near him. Rocco had always been strong, always carried himself with confidence, but now, all Gio saw was a broken boy who was trying to outrun the pain. And Gio hated that he couldn't stop it. Late at night, he would sit awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by everything that had gone wrong. He wished things had been different. He wished the truth had never come out, or better yet, that they had never fallen in love in the first place. Maybe then, none of this would be happening. But most of all, he wished Lois had never kept this secret. Because in the end, that was what had ruined everything. Lois and Brooke Lynn had made a choice years ago, a choice they thought they could bury forever. But secrets like these never stay hidden. And now, 2 lives had been shattered because of it. Dante had never known a pain like this. He had faced enemies, fought battles, nearly lost his life more times than he could count, but nothing compared to the agony of watching his sons destroy themselves. He saw the distance growing between them, the way their bond had turned to ashes, the way the love they once shared had become something twisted and unbearable. And all of it, every ounce of suffering they were going through, led back to one undeniable truth. Lois and Brooke Lynn had lied. They had stolen the truth from Gio and Rocco, let them believe in a love that was never meant to be, let them build a connection that was doomed from the start. And now, the ones paying the price weren't them, it was his children. Dante's fury burned hotter than ever before. You had no right, he growled at Lois, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. You had no right to keep this from them. Lois, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain, but Dante didn't want to hear it. He didn't care about their excuses, about how they had been scared, about how they had thought they were protecting Gio. None of it mattered now. Do you see what you've done? His voice rose, his chest heaving. Do you see what your lies have cost them? Brooke Lynn stood beside her mother, guilt etched all over her face. She had known the truth, too. She had let this happen. And now, looking into Dante's eyes, she knew, he would never forgive them for this. You didn't just hurt them, Dante continued, his voice low and dangerous. You destroyed them. And for that, Lois and Brooke Lynn would have to live with the weight of their choices for the rest of their lives. The ending to this tragedy was too cruel. What had started as a secret, a desperate attempt to bury the mistakes of the past, had unraveled into an unstoppable chain of consequences, leaving behind nothing but pain and irreparable loss. One lie, one decision made years ago, had destroyed everything. And now, there was no way to undo the damage, no way to take back the suffering that had been inflicted. Rocco was gone. No one knew where he had gone, and maybe that was the worst part. He had disappeared without a word, without a trace, without looking back. He had walked away from the life he had known, from the people who had once been his family, carrying nothing but his shattered heart and the unbearable weight of betrayal. He had been abandoned, not by chance, not by circumstance, but by the very people who were supposed to love and protect him. And now, he was the one doing the abandoning. Dante searched for him. He did everything a father could do, called in every favor, checked every possible place Rocco could have gone, begged Sonny for resources, even went as far as reaching out to people he never thought he would turn to. But it was useless. Rocco was gone, and if he didn't want to be found, then no one was going to find him. The realization crushed Dante more than anything else ever had. He had failed his son. All his life, he had sworn to be the kind of father his own had never been, the kind of father who protected his child from pain, who made sure that no matter what, his son would always know he was loved. But in the end, love hadn't been enough. Love couldn't fix what had been broken. And now, Rocco was lost to him. Brooke Lynn stood in silence, watching the wreckage of everything she had once tried to protect. She had thought she was doing the right thing by keeping the secret, by letting the past stay buried. She had convinced herself that the truth would only bring more pain, that Gio and Rocco would be better off not knowing. She had been wrong. So wrong. Because the truth had come out anyway, and instead of protecting them, she had only ensured that when the truth finally did surface, it would be 10 times more devastating. Gio barely spoke anymore. He had once been full of life, full of quiet strength and unwavering loyalty. But now, that version of him was gone. He moved through the days like a ghost, hollow and distant, as if the very essence of who he was had been stripped away. The light in his eyes had faded, replaced by something broken, something that couldn't be repaired. And Lois. Lois had to live with the knowledge that she was the architect of this disaster. She had made the choice all those years ago, thinking she was saving her son from a difficult life. Instead, she had unknowingly sentenced him to this. The guilt consumed her, clawing at her from the inside out, an inescapable punishment for the mistake she had made. The truth was out, but at what cost? They had lost everything. The love between Gio and Rocco had been destroyed, shattered into something neither of them could ever reclaim. The bond between father and son had been severed, perhaps permanently. Trust, the most fragile and precious thing, had been broken beyond repair. And what remained? Nothing but pain. Pain and regret that came too late. There was no fixing this. No going back. No undoing the choices that had led them here. Only the wreckage of a family that had once been whole.